like pretty much everybody is here, and including welcome Ryan Burns. So I guess we can start now. I'm going to call if Amy. This is our inaugural audit committee meeting. So if I stumble, it's only because I'm not really sure how this goes. So at this time, we'll call this meeting to order. And Kathy, would you please do a roll call?
Sure. This is the first meeting of the newly formed Humboldt County Audit Committee. The voting members, and I'm going to do a roll call on the voting members and then the advisory staff. A voting member, Cheryl Dillingham, are you present?
Present.
Voting member, Michael Evenson, are you present?
Present.
Corey Weber, are you present?
Present.
Supervisor Virginia Bass?
Present.
Supervisor Mike Wilson?
I'm here.
All right, and now the advisory board members. Auditor Controller Karen Paz Dominguez. I will mark her.
But I'm here to observe and take notes, and I'll forward any messages to her.
All right.
Or any questions to her.
All right. John Bartholomew, Treasurer Tax Collector.
Here.
And Amy Nelson, CAO.
Here.
All right. Everyone's present except for the Auditor Controller.
All right. Well, then we'll move on to public comment. And if there's any public members who'd like to comment on an item not on the agenda, this is the time to do it. I think we only have one public member, maybe two. Is there anyone? We've got a feedback happening here. Is there anyone who wants to make comment? Hearing no one, then we'll go back to the agenda. And the first item of business is the distribution and review of the Audit Committee Charter. And CAO Nielsen.
Thank you, Chair Bass. I'm going to, do we have an echo? Is somebody on two devices by any chance?
Not me.
Can everyone mute themselves? Kathy, are you able to mute yourself?
No.
Okay, is there an echo now? Okay, all right, I will proceed. So I'm going to share my screen. The audit charter was distributed. Well, first of all, it was in an agenda item back in March. And in addition, it was emailed out to the audit committee members this morning. So hopefully you all have access to that charter. But I'm going to share my screen and just do a brief presentation of what's contained in the audit committee charter. Can you all see that? Okay, I see a thumbs up. Okay, so I will proceed, but hold on just a second. Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to hide some things in terms of everybody's picture so I can make sure I'm looking at my PowerPoint. Okay, here we go. So the purpose of the audit committee is to bring independence and transparency and accountability to critical financial management practices. An audit committee also provides a forum separate from management in which auditors and other interested parties can candidly discuss concerns. The purpose of the audit committee as proposed is to assist the Board of Supervisors in its oversight of the integrity of the county's financial statements, the systems of internal controls, policies, and procedures, the qualifications and independence of the county's external auditors, also independent auditor, and the performance of the county's corrective action plans. Some quick housekeeping: the committee will hold public meetings pursuant to the Brown Act. That means public comment on all items, no serial meetings, no action taken by the committee outside of officially noticed meetings. Meetings are going to be held quarterly. We'll meet twice a year with the external auditors or the independent auditor at the beginning and end of each audit. These meetings may count towards the quarterly meeting requirement. The voting committee is made up of 5 members and a quorum consists of 3. Special district and school representatives as well as citizen members are all appointed by the board to serve 2-year terms. 1 citizen member will serve a 1-year term, so that appointments will be staggered. Oh, there we go. So how do you keep your seat? Make sure you attend these meetings regularly. If you miss 3 consecutive meetings, at the 4th consecutive missed meeting, the seat will be automatically vacated. All agendas will be posted to the county's website. The committee's records and your records as committee members, including emails and texts, are part of the public record and subject to the California Public Records Act. Please note in section 5 of the committee charter, where it discusses conflicts of interest in general, it states that members will disclose whether they raised money for or donated to the campaigns of committee members or agencies that have funds in the county treasury. Members also won't secure employment with bond underwriters, bond counsels, security brokerages or dealers, or financial services firms with whom the TTC is doing business. The committee is made up of 8 total members. 5 are voting members, 2 are the chair and vice chair of the board of supervisors. 1 is from the special district or schools. 2 are citizen members who are qualified and knowledgeable in government finances. Advisory staff are non-voting members and include the treasurer, tax collector, auditor, controller, and the county administrative officer. The voting committee members vote on action the committee will take, while advisory staff serve in a support role, providing information and clarification to your committee. Broadly, your committee has 3 main responsibilities: to provide independent review and oversight of the county's financial reporting process, internal controls, and independent auditors, report your actions to the board and make recommendations, provide open avenues of communication among county staff, county officials, independent auditors, and the board. Annually, your committee will inquire of the advisory committee members, which again are the treasurer, tax collector, auditor, controller, and county administrative officer, and independent auditors regarding any significant financial risks or exposures. You will also review with the independent auditor and auditor controller the adequacies of the county's internal controls, including computerized information system controls and security. And you'll review findings and recommendations made by the external auditor and the county's response. To meet those broad responsibilities we just went over, your committee needs specific authorities, and I'll just provide a quick overview of that authority. Your committee has the authority to recommend, before they are engaged, whether the independent auditor should be appointed or dismissed. Your committee has authority to determine their rates and oversee their work. Your committee reviews the independent auditor's audits and associated work plans meant to correct issues addressed in the audit. In this function, the committee has the authority to review, discuss, and monitor corrective action plans, and do so in consultation with departments. Your committee has authority to retain access to any and all reports and external auditors it needs and/or requests. You may conduct follow-up oversight to regulatory audits conducted by oversight agencies. The committee also has the authority to receive complaints and conduct investigations related to your scope. You may also retain services and goods to carry out the committee's mission. There is a $50,000 annual spending limit. If needed, you may ask county employees to attend meetings and require it. You can request elected officials to attend. Investigating findings need to be presented to this committee and the board of supervisors. What specific actions will your committee take to carry out its responsibilities? You can review everything in the charter that was distributed to you, but here are some of the highlights. Your committee will meet to determine whether audit services are needed, additional audit services are needed, and engage those firms and consider requests for additional audit services. Regarding the audit, the annual audit and the work plan, your committee will work with the independent auditor to consider the scope of the audit and a good corrective action plan. The reason why we have advisory staff is to help ensure audit efforts can be coordinated and efficient. You will also receive financial statements from the county's auditor controller. And finally, you'll receive a report from the independent auditor after the single audit. During the single audit, your committee may not meet. However, the independent auditor will be directed to notify the full committee, including voting and non-voting members, of any issues causing delays in progressing through the single audit and any significant actions being taken or significant developments that occur during the single audit. After the single audit is where much of the committee's work lies, and much of it is reviewing the audit and related documents. You'll of course review the financial statements, consider whether they are complete and consistent, and you'll review the independent auditor's audit and reports. You will review and discuss audit findings, review, consider, and through the year monitor recommended corrective action plans. During the year, your committee will receive status reports for each corrective action implementation. You'll take a look at any obstacles the auditor came across with county employees during the audit. You'll review their judgment about the appropriateness and acceptability of the county's financial disclosures and application of accounting principles. You'll also consider critical accounting policies and practices used by the county. Finally, the other responsibilities this committee will take on include other audits. The single audit covers the county's funds broadly, but there are other audits that take place periodically that the committee will review. When this occurs, you'll review any corresponding audit reports, regulatory filings, and consider their completeness and accuracy. If there are material disagreements between the internal auditor and the auditor controller, your committee will resolve those disagreements. When it comes to complaints, your committee will provide a confidential, anonymous avenue for individuals, including county employees and public agencies, to submit complaints. It is important to note that this does not remove or supersede the authority of the grand jury or the auditor controller to receive complaints or whistleblower submissions. In the annual presentation to the board, your committee will state whether you have discussed financial statements with the county management and the independent auditors in private, and whether the committee believes that the financial statements are fairly presented to the best of your knowledge. And with that, that concludes the summary, and I will stop my screen sharing and am available to answer any questions.
Does anyone have questions at this time for the CAO? No. Well, I will go out to the public to see if there's anyone who'd like to make comment on this under public comment. Not hearing any. We'll go back onto the committee. Do we take any official action on this, Amy? Sorry.
No, this was just a report.
Okay, cool. All right, so no one has any questions, so it was written very clearly and plainly, so thank you. And oh, John has a question. Sorry. Tax.
No, that's okay. I just put my hand up. I believe per the charter at this meeting, the board is to determine which of the citizen appointees are to serve out 1 year. And I just was asking if this is the time it should happen, just so it does get done, because it's supposed to happen at this meeting per the charter.
Okay, CAO, I mean, Amy, CAO, whatever. Is that something we should discuss now, since that is like an action, I guess, but can we just have the conversation here?
Yes, you can determine which of your community members, which are Cheryl Dillingham and Michael Evenson, has a 1 year term.
My question is, would it be limited to that 1 year, or can they reapply again? I didn't catch that if you said that there's a limit of.
They can absolutely reapply. The purpose of that is to make sure we have staggered terms. So if you lose 2 community members, you were trying to avoid losing 2 community members at the same time.
Okay, so I guess my question is between Corey and Michael. Either one of you want to volunteer?
It's Cheryl and Michael.
I mean, sorry about that. You're the school person. This is a new thing for me. So Cheryl, I like that picture of Cheryl's very nice. So Cheryl, Michael, either one of you have a desire to take that 1 year spot for now?
I can make it easy and volunteer.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. So thank you, John, for bringing that up. There's no action to be taken on that, I don't believe then. And thank you for making it easy, Michael. All right. So with that, we'll move on to the next item. The status report. We've got the external auditors from Clifton Larson. Alan, same here somewhere with us. Rich, is that you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. My name is Rich Gonzalez. I'm a principal with Clifton Larson Allen. I've been with the firm for about 22 years. Also a graduate of HSU, so I'm glad to be back, working with Humboldt. Is it okay if I share my screen, Amy? Do you know if I have rights?
Yes, absolutely. You should
Okay.
be able to, but if you don't.
Okay, great. I have a very brief presentation to kind of give you the scope of our audit in case you guys have any questions about our approach and what our objective is. Let's see. Okay, you want to see my screen? Okay, so I'm just going to briefly cover the purpose of our audit and also briefly discuss our audit approach. All right, so starting with the purpose of our audit. So the purpose is to provide reasonable, not absolute assurance whether the statements of the county are free from material misstatement. So basically, we're giving an opinion to allow others to place reliance on your statements. There's this misconception that because we're the auditors that we are supposed to catch everything. So if there's some revolving account at the sheriff, or there's some abuse or some petty cash fund that's not being reconciled, that's not really our objective. We could perform those types of procedures, outside the scope of our audit for our fees, but our main objective is really to provide an opinion on your financial statements. And we use materiality to determine what's important or not. So we're not focusing on the small items, we're looking for the large items or the areas where we think there's risk of misstatement. The second objective is to give an opinion on compliance with your major programs. So the county has several federal programs, anywhere from transportation to social services to health. And we audit what is known as major programs, programs that are significant in size and also complexity. And we determine which programs are important, and then we test those, and then we provide an opinion on compliance with those programs. Every year, those programs change based on the criteria set forth by the standards. And if a program does have findings, for example, we may test that program every year, but for the most part, we're rotating the programs that we test year after year. Okay, so as far as our audit approach, it can be broken down to 4 main phases: planning, systems evaluation, testing and analysis, and reporting. The first phase is where we spend a lot of time, and that's the planning phase. At this time, we develop a timeline with the county staff. So we come up with some timelines on when we're going to obtain the information, perform the field work, and issue the report. With the County of Humboldt, we're not quite there yet. We're still waiting to schedule the audit. And that brings me to the next step as we provide a PBC listing, which is a listing of items needed to perform the audit. And in today's world, we do everything electronically. It's not like the old days where we mail out a list and then we arrive at the county and everything's in a box. We do everything through a portal. So we set up a portal listing all the items needed for the audit, including bank reconciliations, debt agreements, trial balance reports, things like that. And then the benefit of the portal is the county's able to see what we're seeing. So everybody's on the same page at all times. So for example, if we receive an item from the county, we review it and we mark it as accepted. If something's pending, it'll still show up on the portal as pending or open. And again, it's a benefit to both parties because at any time, anyone can go to the portal to see what the status is of open items. The third main item we do in the planning, and this is what drives the whole audit pretty much, is the trial balance. The trial balance is basically all the accounts from the county's reporting system. We always want to make sure we have a complete and final trial balance. That way we're not chasing moving targets. We want to make sure those numbers are complete, finalized. Once we get the trial balance, that's when we begin doing the next step, which is our preliminary analytics and review. So we'll do various tests on the data, including comparing to prior year, comparing to budget. We'll look at any unusual fluctuations, and we'll build that into our audit plan. We audit several counties in California, and all counties are pretty similar. So we kind of know what to expect before we even look at the numbers. So when we do see a variance that's going in the opposite direction, we know that that's another risk area we have to focus on. Okay, the second phase is our systems evaluation. There's two major steps we do here. The first major step is we understand the county's controls and we test them. So we identify what the significant accounts are, such as cash receipts, cash payments, cash reconciliations, capital assets, long-term debt, et cetera. And then we perform interviews with key individuals about the processes, and we try to identify what the controls are and whether those controls are designed and working. A second thing we do is we design our audit programs based on our risk. So, after we've looked at the trial balance, identified significant accounts, identified unusual variances, performed our interviews, then we specify which programs we're going to perform for the audit. It's really important to know that we don't do a canned approach. So we don't just do the same thing every year, unless it's the same risks every year. So our procedures are based on all our planning and our interviews and our risk analysis. The third phase is testing and analysis. This includes our field work. So this is our actual testing of accounts. So for example, if we identify that receivables is a very risky account because it's complex, involves estimates, non-routine because it's done at year end, and the balances are large, we'll design tests to actually, we'll design procedures to actually test receivables in this phase. And this is when we'll obtain the supporting documentation for our selections. And then finally, we execute our audit plan. So all our procedures that we design in the first two phases, we carry those out in this phase. And then the final phase is the reporting. So this is when we compile the reports for the financial statements, the single audit, and management letter. And this is where we identify any deficiencies that we report to management. And obviously, we'll be reporting to you as the committee members. There's three types of findings that are very common. There's the management comments, which are basically just recommendations for improvement. And those will be parked in the management letter. And then we have what we call significant deficiencies and material weaknesses. Those are like a higher level of findings that require reporting to governance, the board, and to the committee. And those will be presented in the single audit report like they were in 2019's audit. Any questions about the audit approach? Okay, and that's pretty much all I wanted to show you at this point. But as of right now, we're still in the planning phase. When I last talked to the Auditor Controller's office, they're still in the process of closing the books. So, once we have a better understanding of when that date's going to be, then the plan is to actually come up with a time frame of, okay, here's when we're going to perform the audit. And our plan is we'd like to get it all complete within, a 2 to 3 week period if possible. So if everything is complete and uploaded to the portal, I could put a team together to get everything done within a reasonable amount of time. If there's still open items or accounts that are not reconciled, then there's not much we can do until we obtain that information from the county.
I have a question for Rich. I don't know if anyone else does. I'm sure some might. Is this a good time to ask you?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, I'm just, I know you work with a lot of other counties, it sounds like. And, I know it feels really late to most of us for this to be closing, but what is the general, what is your general understanding of like in a normal year, when should this closing piece be done? So
most of our clients close September, October. There were some delays this year because of the pandemic, but I'd say most of our clients were closed by October. We had a couple that weren't able to have their audit performed until January, again, because of the pandemic, and they had some turnover, and they weren't quite set up to work remotely. But in any given year, it's October's like the most common time frame for closing, 3 months after the close.
So that would be kind of an important date for this group. I mean, it's good for me to know because it's something to look for. What should it be looking like? And
Yeah,
thank
I
you
would,
for that.
yeah, I think October is a reasonable time frame.
Okay. So we have, I don't know which one is first. Corey has his hand up and followed by Michael. That's all right.
Hi, I represent schools, so we go through a similar audit process. As a matter of fact, I've reviewed the last audit and the same structure and everything. But we have a deadline of when we have to submit our audit reports to the state controller's office. Does the county have a similar deadline?
It does, but it has been extended because of the pandemic. So the deadline for issuing the single audit report and the reports to SCO is March 31st. But due to the pandemic, it was extended 6 months after the typical deadline, which would be, let's see, end of September, I believe, is the deadline for this year.
Yeah, that's a lot more, a longer deadline than schools have, because normally in a normal year, we have through December 15th.
Right.
And then it was extended also because of the pandemic to March 31st. So the normal deadline would be March 31st, so for the county.
Correct. Yeah. Most counties try to issue the report by the end of December, and that's because that's when the AFR, it used to be called the CAFR, but I guess they're calling it AFR now, is due. Even though I know almost half our clients have postponed it this year, but March 31st is the absolute deadline for the single audit reporting package, which includes the financial statements. And then, yeah, because of the extension, it is now September. I imagine it'll go back to March 31st next year.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Michael and then John.
Hi, Rich. I have a couple of questions. When you're analyzing our financial statements and our control processes for our control environment from a virtual standpoint, how are you analyzing things like physical safeguards and the general internal environment?
Through interviews and doing walkthroughs. We're able to do walkthroughs online. We use, during the pandemic, we didn't visit any clients, and that was the norm for 2019-20. But we still did our walkthroughs. We'd utilize the technology, using Teams. So if we were walking through like the review of journal entries, we would pick some random entries and have the client send us information or show us on screen. We just had to get creative with how we performed our walkthroughs in this environment.
And my other question is, when you're testing internal controls, are you just testing minimums, or are you testing to see if they're maybe breaking cost benefit analysis or anything like that?
Testing, we don't do a lot of control testing. We do more substantive testing. So like, for example, receivables, there's not really a good control to test to ensure that receivables are properly reported. So because we don't do control testing, in this example, we have to do a lot more substantive testing. So which means we have to look at a lot more supporting documentations and much larger selections. And we find that to be more effective than testing a control that's not very easy to test. As far as control testing, we always test controls over disbursements. So that's always a good control. But even with that testing, we still do a lot of testing of cutoff and, significant transactions.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
John.
Thank you, Chair Bass. And the only comment I had, no question, was per R&T code 5151, the treasurer is supposed to report to the state controller's office each year by September 30th what the interest apportionment rate was for the prior fiscal year, along with our computations for how we derive that interest apportionment. And so it does create a difficulty for this office because we have not been able to report to the state controller's office to satisfy that code. I just wanted to point that out to the committee so that we're all aware of it, because it is a by statute, we are supposed to do that reporting. Thank you.
Right. Anyone else have a question or comment? Corey?
Sorry, I'm back. I do want to kind of tag on to what John was saying. It also affects schools because we do have the earlier time frame to finalize our audits. So when things like interest, for example, isn't posted for the fourth quarter when we're closing the books, we actually have to send to each of the districts as an independent auditor that we have to send cash reconciliations between our financial system and the county's financial system. And they're incomplete when we don't have those taxes actually calculated. So I did want to point that out. I also had a question regarding the scope of the audit as far as the funds that are audited, because just to get some clarity on, so for example, schools and special districts and the funds, and what aspects of those funds that are held at the county do you guys audit?
Okay, so we audit the funds. All the funds are in scope, and they're all broken up in opinion units. The schools and the special districts are considered investment trust funds. So those have a different scope than like the general fund or funds that are within the primary government. Funds that are part of the primary government, those we test pretty much everything, right? Revenues, expenses, balance sheet items, et cetera. For funds that are outside the primary government, like your fiduciary funds, we're basically just focusing on the cash, because that's really the only thing being presented on the financial statements. We do look at the there is a statement that shows the inflows and outflows, which include the interest. So we do look at that, but it's a very high level. But the main focus is really testing the cash and investments and making sure that investment trust funds are properly classified as investment trust funds. The biggest risk there is you may have an investment trust fund that's really an agency fund, or it's really part of the primary government. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. You're welcome.
All right. Whoops. And CAO Nielsen?
I just wanted to add that also for budget planning purposes, timely close of the fiscal year, it also impacts the county administrative office and budget preparation for future fiscal years, because we need those year-end fund balances to be for financial planning purposes.
All right. So if there's no more questions for Rich, or Rich has nothing else to tell us on this, I know we don't have a lot of public on, but is there a member of the public who has a comment on this? All right, seeing none, come back to this group, and with no other questions or comments and no action to be taken, I guess we'll move on to the next item. Correct? F, whatever that is. Status report on corrective action plan for 2018-19 audit findings. And who would provide us that report? Amy?
Through the chair, that was something that your auditor controller would normally provide. I don't know if Mr. Hussey can provide an update.
Thank you. No wonder no one was answering. Jim, did you have something you wanted to you could help us out with there or share?
No, I have nothing to present today. Thank you.
Okay. Is that the same go for the cost allocation plan also, CIO Nielsen?
Yes.
We're going to have this conversation later on future audit committee meetings, which is next. And Supervisor Wilson and I were talking about maybe looking at what's not at the end of the month, or it's something that is not as impactful on the auditor's office. So we'll get to that next, I guess. So F and G, we have no official business on. Cheryl.
Well, so I saw the email from the auditor controller, and she said that nobody had asked her to present anything at the meeting today. So was there a miscommunication?
Amy, I know that she's been invited multiple times and she saw the agenda.
Well, there were several doodle polls and emails requesting availability, and the agenda was distributed in advance and asked for input from support staff, which are the CAO, TTC, and the auditor controller.
So I guess in the future, perhaps we should have these under which person would be presenting, because then Jim might have been able to come here with some information instead of going, uh-oh, what am I supposed to talk about? So, for future, I mean, this is our first meeting, so it's just going to take some practice. So, alrighty then. Well, and thank you, Cheryl, for that question. It's interesting that you got that communication from the auditor, so we'll also have to check up on we'll check with her on that. So we're going to go to H, which is administrative matters. And I don't know, Amy, I'll turn this over to you.
Well, Chair Bass, there, it's H is something that the treasurer tax collector is going to.
Okay, thank you. Can we maybe on these things in the future, just because of regular meetings, I know use the public or department heads, and that would help me out here.
Sure.
Thank you. This isn't like a different world for me. I'm not a financial person. Yes, John, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Bass. And I just wanted to bring this to the committee's attention because I have some concerns about this particular government code that we are not currently in compliance with. And I'm just going to read this narrative that I wrote up so that I make sense and that it's more understandable than my winging it. So on July 1, 2019, the auditor stopped issuing certificates of the auditor for deposits made because they, meaning the auditor's department, they do not actually take the deposit. The Treasury Department does. But that certificate was the primary tool used throughout the deposit process to ensure accuracy of transaction data passed from the initiator of the deposit to the bank and ultimately posted to the general ledger, whereby departments making deposits to the Treasury first stop by the auditor's office to get a certificate reflecting the date, deposit amount, and fund to which the deposit was to be receipted. Then the deposit and certificate was delivered to Treasury staff where the certificate and deposit information was verified. Once verified, the department making the deposit was given a copy for their records. Treasury staff then made the deposit to the bank and then included each deposit in a daily receipts report to the auditor for posting to the general ledger, which matched the information from each certificate of the auditor created at the beginning of the process. Therefore, the same transaction records were checked, balanced, and shared by the initiating department and the auditor and treasurer departments, so everyone was on the same page with the exact same information. The certificates of the auditor were used to ensure checks and balances between all parties involved, so when the certificate of the auditor was taken out of the process, it eliminated that information tool, making it difficult for Treasury and other departments to confirm that data posted to the general ledger accurately reflected each deposit. Since then, we have not used an agreed upon alternative control procedure as required by Government Code 27008, because none were ever memorialized between the auditor and Treasurer's Department as required by the code. Long story short, we need to agree to alternate control procedures, and we'd like to propose a shift in how those procedures are done in the future. Towards that end, Amy Christensen, here with us on the meeting today, will give a synopsis of what we propose those procedures should be going forward. Incidentally, I reached out to all the treasurer tax collectors across California about whether they had established alternate control procedures, and 3 counties, actually 4 now, I had another one this morning, respond that they use similar procedures to what Amy will will now describe. So Amy, if you would chime in now and describe that process that we're going to propose.
Yes, happy to. Finance Enterprise, the county's financial software, has an accounts receivable module that functions like the county's accounts payable modules that are currently utilized. And the overview of that process would be departments enter their deposit information into Finance Enterprise, similar to the way they are entering an accounts payable invoice into the system. After that entry is made and saved in the system, departments would then bring their deposits directly to the treasurer's office, and then treasury staff would verify the entry that was made into Finance Enterprise, confirm that the deposit total in the system matches the deposit total that we're going to make to the bank. And then after we approve it, that would kick off a workflow process in Finance Enterprise that would route that record to auditor staff to verify from their lens of accounting. And then after all receipts for the day have gone through that process, the auditor would post and distribute that verified batch to the general ledger. The term we found in the system is interactive cash receipts, and it would provide the checks and balances between departments, making the deposit, the treasurer making it in the bank, and then the auditor posting it to the general ledger. And that would satisfy Government Code 27008 with a verifiable alternate control procedure. And while this shift would take quite a bit of collaboration between county departments and with IT, it's not something that we could just snap our fingers and make the change. I do believe it is achievable if we put in the work in the implementation.
Thank you, Amy. And just to chime in on that, the other counties that did respond to my outreach to them indicated that it's worked quite well. And along with this alternate control procedure that we're proposing, we also memorialize it with the auditor controller. So it's on record for how the process would take place. And that way, if changes are made, we can update that record so that the county has all its ducks in a row relative to this code. And I think the procedures will flow much more smoothly going forward. But as Amy indicated, it's not just between our two departments. It would be every department that would be making deposits. And for schools and districts that make deposits, then Treasury staff would, at this particular time, since outside agencies don't have access to Finance Enterprise, then Treasury staff would have to input that data in lieu of them doing it when they come to make the deposit at the department. And that's all we had for this item. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or Amy could too.
Chair Bass, you're on mute.
Yeah, I know. Sorry about that. You'd think I'd know by now. I don't see any hand. Oh, I do. Corey has a question.
I had to find my blue hand. It took me a second. Just a quick question, John. So the initial process that was in place before, like you said, schools, we don't have access to input into the county system. And so what we would receive an auditor's receipt when funds were posted to one of our school funds to alert us as to what what amount was posted to what fund. So then we could verify on our end and then enter into our financial system. So is this the system that you were referring to was in place? And so what you're proposing is what would take its place now?
The auditor receipt you're referring to, that function was actually turned off on November 8th, I believe, 2019. And you're right, that was a consolidated report that was made available to schools to show each deposit transaction. And so it's a similar, but it's not quite the exact same. It's not a different process. You were getting that information at the tail end after the deposit was made into the system, and then you had that information available. But it is related to the same receipt, same certificate.
So would the end result in what you're proposing be that, because once again, since we're not in the system, we wouldn't get that notification that it's gone through the process and been posted. So then there would have to be an additional step then to alert schools and special districts when that process was completed, correct?
That's a good question. And Amy, I don't know if you have an answer to that, or Jim, something that could be generated in the system. I do not know, but it would be data that could be extracted from Finance Enterprise, and I would imagine sent to you in a consolidated report form, similar to what was included in the auditor's receipt back then. And maybe it could just be a Finance Enterprise certificate or something titled along those lines, so it would not imply that the auditor had taken money as a deposit in any way, shape, or form, which is one of the reasons I believe that the auditor wanted to change the certificate of the auditor within this within the deposit process.
I can respond to that if that's okay through the chair. As long as the data's in Finance Enterprise, we can certainly figure out a way to pull it out and create a report that meets all of your needs. We may have to write that. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that immediately would do that for us. But I work with consultant Bob Cessnon, who's very savvy in Finance Enterprise, and could certainly ask him to help us with that, and could get that off the ground in no time flat.
That would be great. Yeah, because just so everybody understands, these schools maintain a separate financial system of record, which is our records that are audited, and we can't post anything into that record until it's posted to the proper fund at the county level. And that's how we maintain both systems having the same fund balance. So I just wanted to kind of clarify why I was asking all those questions.
All right, thank you, Corey. And since John mentioned Jim's name, I didn't know if Jim had something he wanted to add to it.
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay. And Michael, did you have your hand up? There's one other hand up, but it's not up anymore.
Yes, I had my hand up. Assistant CAO Hayes answered my question. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you. CAO Nielsen.
So my question is really to the Treasurer Tax Collector, John Bartholomew, about the change management process that would be used to start this change, because we have some departments that have, such as Health and Human Services, that have hundreds of millions of dollars, and so that might be an additional workload that we would want to consider for them. And so I'm just curious about the change management process that might be involved in this new procedure.
Thanks for that question, Amy. And the rollout would take place over time with the introduction to all departments for the proposal. And Amy Christensen, I'm sure, could explain better what the change at the department level would mean. So Amy, if you could just chime in and describe the difference and how it would relate to additional work or equivalent work at the department level.
I think in the long run, it wouldn't be more work, it would be different work. Fiscal staff are already preparing Excel spreadsheets or PDFs and keying in a breakdown of each deposit. fund number, object code, dollar amount, fund number, object code, dollar amount, and doing that data entry outside of finance enterprise. And then the receipts get routed to us and then sent to the auditor's office, who's putting the data entry in to finance enterprise. So we'd be cutting out an extra layer of work. Departments would just key their deposit breakdown directly into the system, and then it would be verified by the auditor's staff. So the change, like I said, it would be a big change and it would take some finessing to get there. So in the immediate, there could be more work as you're retraining and adjusting your processes internally. But in the long run, I believe it would be the same amount of work to make a deposit.
Thank you for the clarification.
Mike?
Thank you, Chair Bass. I just, in terms of process, this is a proposal, and it seems reasonable, in terms of in this context. But would we expect that the Treasurer's Office would then now reach out to the Auditor's Office and other departments that would have impact, and then report back to us at our next meeting, kind of the progress on how that discussion goes and what, and how this is moving forward?
I'll respond to that. Supervisor Wilson, thank you for that question. And I would work with the auditor on this proposal to make sure that it made sense for the auditor's office to move forward with this type of change, because it would be a significant change. And I also think that it would be, and Jim, you might want to chime in on this, I believe it would be a reduction of required work by the auditor because the data would already be in the system. So they would have a reduced amount of data input on their end. They'd be still verifying that all the data is correct, but instead of their staff members inputting the particular data for each deposit, it would already be in the system, and they just have to verify that it is correct. And now, again, I am not a tech wizard by any means within finance enterprise. I don't dwell in it like the auditor's office. So the auditor's office would need to engage this process if it and provided it makes sense for them to do so. And IT would also be involved because different programming may be needed, et cetera. So everything isn't ready to go within finance enterprise, but because other counties are using a similar process as was described by Amy, I think that and they believe that it's worked well for them. I think that we should look into it, and provided it does make sense from the auditor controller's perspective, I think we should pursue it. And the auditor controller would need to engage in this because it would be primarily driven on their end, since they are, so to speak, the gatekeepers with finance enterprise. And so it's a proposal. And if it makes sense to go forward, then I would be supportive in any way possible to help it get rolled out in a seamless fashion.
Through the chair, if I may follow up.
Sure, then we'll go to Michael.
Sure. John, so just, programmatically moving this kind of thing forward, would you feel like it's reasonable that you would basically manage this change and your department would be responsible for providing this committee with a report or update reports with sort of, progress and or decision-making, points that we would be looking at?
Yes, we'd be more than happy to help drive this action forward to get things rolling. And I'd be happy to coordinate with department heads and their staff for how to roll it out. And Amy Christensen here is very adept at working in the system and from the Treasury side. So The expertise is available, and I know the Auditor Controller's Office can well, hopefully, if it makes sense for them, that they would engage and help roll this out. And I'm very glad that Michael is on the call, the meeting today, because as a representative working with the Department of Health and Human Services, they would have a significant amount of change to take place within their department. And so I'd be very interested in hearing what your response to this potential change is, Michael.
Michael, we'll go over to you.
So first, I'm usually a big fan of any change that removes duplication of labors, which sounds like this has the potential to do, in that it would reduce or eliminate the duplicative entry both at the department level where the department staff is making their spreadsheets, and then again at the Auditor Controller's Office. And when you remove duplication of entry, you reduce chances of error. So I think that's a positive step in the direction from this preliminary understanding that I've heard. So of course, I have to talk a little bit more with accounts receivable staff and finance staff to understand a little bit how, from the perspective of DHHS, what they think of it. But that's my personal perspective on what I'm hearing here. My question for probably John was, would it make sense to come back on the August 9th meeting and discuss the progress of this, as Supervisor Wilson mentioned, but also the perspective of this for the control environment, the advantages and disadvantages to the control environment, and whether a go or no go decision has been made?
That's a good question, Michael. And this is a proposal that Amy and I have put together in the last few days. So the next steps, in my opinion, would be to reach out to the Auditor Controller's Office and first make sure that, or not make sure, but ask whether or not it would be agreeable to them to move forward with setting this new alternate procedure into place. And if that does make sense to the Auditor Controller, then I think that we could begin planning for rolling it out. And I think by August, provided that there isn't any hiccups with IT or the finance enterprise system, I think that we could let this committee know where it stands and give a timeline for when it would be put into place, if, again, provided the Auditor Controller would support it and engage in helping do the rollout, because again, they are the primary gatekeepers for the general ledger, and they would need to be engaged with it and be part of that process. And so I can't speak for the Auditor Controller, obviously. So, but I feel fairly confident that we could get this done because Finance Enterprise is a very robust system, and I don't see why it could not accommodate this type of change.
Perfect. Thank you, John.
And I see Cheryl has her hand up.
So I'm okay to speak now?
Yes, please.
So I've been out of the county for a while, but I'm going to ask kind of a technical question. Well, actually, I'm going to ask, so as a committee, this is the kind of thing that there was an expectation we would look at, which is procedures. So normally when you enter stuff into the GL about what you're talking about, it would have to hit accounts receivable. And then when they actually you would have to take an action to then cause that to hit cash. Because currently, I believe it just, when the auditor's office puts it in, it's hitting cash right from the get-go. So has there been a discussion about
think you hit mute by accident.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
So did you miss my whole accounts receivable cash thing?
Got part of it, I think. John, what part did you didn't hear? Because I think it's to you.
It's only about 10 seconds worth, Cheryl. So most of what you were saying came through.
So my question was just the process about when it hits cash, because it would need to hit accounts receivable until your office actually received the cash or the cash hit the bank, which is different, I believe, than how it's working now, or at least how it used to work.
Okay, and thanks, Cheryl. Amy, do you or Jim, do you know, can you answer Cheryl's question, since I don't actually work in the system, how that accounts receivable to cash relative to the deposit in the bank would be reflected in the system and thereby then posted to the general ledger once that all takes place?
I can.
The batch would, oh,
my apologies. You go first.
I was just going to say, I think the entries would be in a pending undistributed batch by the department. And then once the department brought the deposit to us, our step of verifying that would kick it off to the auditor's office, so they would know it's in the bank. And then after their final approval, they would distribute the batch and it would hit cash.
And I just wanted to verify from before that these deposits are entered in by our office and distributed by our office. As far as the impact this would have on our workload, I'm going to have forward that to the auditor controller. And also, as far as the receivables, the entire system has as many parts that we've been looking at about posting it not to directly to cash, but also posting receivables. And this is that is another topic, and also something what they're looking at, and which I would defer to the auditor controller.
Cheryl, did that help? Kind of.
Yes, that helped. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, John, is there anything on that other than that? Do you need any action from us, or this is something that you're going to go and let us know about as following up, how it's going or how it gets kicked off?
Thank you, Chair Bass. And at this point, I am just pleased to hear that the committee seems to be supportive of looking into these alternative procedures. And so my next step would be to get in touch with the auditor controller and start this discussion between our two departments, whereby Jim would be involved and Amy to see how we should roll this out. And if it makes sense to the auditor controller, then we would start working on a plan of action for the rollout. And then we would be in communication with this committee in addition to all the departments throughout the county and the schools and the districts for the change in how the deposit process would take place.
Okay, thank you, John. Amy, I do have a question on this. We've got on this agenda, it's just a little bit, obviously, it's different than usual. So we had this discussion, that John just shared with us, but now it looks like our actual item is the deciding when we're meeting. This is I'm hoping these agendas get a little more clarified as we go further, because I'm looking at going, it doesn't feel like I'm having to ask too many questions. But if I'm looking at the agenda right, then we are ready to start talking about the meeting schedule.
Sure.
Yeah.
So So yes, next on your agenda is to determine your meeting schedule. And so you are supposed to meet 4 times a year and at 40 days after the end of each quarter. And so contained on your in the agenda are weeks, 4 weeks in the year that end at that are 40 days or a little bit before 40 days before the end of the quarter. And so, you know, staff can just work to schedule those meetings that week if that is the committee's prerogative.
I'm gonna, okay, Mike, go ahead, and then I have a question or my thought I'd like to share.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just looking at that August 9th. I mean, typically, I can't remember what our supervisor board schedule is this year and whether we moved the first 2 weeks of August around. Okay, so that fits in. What can you remind me what we moved those 2 weeks to?
Through the chair, your board's break is the week of July 26th and August 2nd.
Ah, thank you. Thanks for the update. So that was my only question.
Well, my question is, since the auditor is not able to be here with us, I feel like I would benefit by actually having something where we could have her with us in one of these meetings prior to just waiting for another, you know, waiting till August. And I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I see a couple of head nodding, so maybe we can have a conversation on that. I saw both Michael and Corey nodding. You want to, either one of you want to weigh in?
Yeah, no, I think it would be really helpful to have a meeting because a lot was discussed here that I would have really liked to have her point of view on, so it could get a fuller picture, especially with starting off, you know, our work as a committee. So yeah, if we can do something where we can get together, that'll work with her being in attendance to kind of, you know, do another start, so to speak, before we dive too deep into the year. That would be great.
Okay, thank you. I saw John was moving his hand up and down, so I didn't know, John, did you have something you wanted to say? And then Mike?
Well, I was just going to say that I would recommend through the chair that Jim be able to go back and talk with the auditor controller about this discussion and just to make sure that she is agreeable to look into this further, and then we can coordinate a plan of action like I mentioned, and then I'd be happy to report back to Kathy Hayes for maybe scheduling another meeting if it makes sense to the auditor to move forward with this action. And
that wasn't, I'm sorry, John, I'll just stop you there. I mean, that's fine for the action, regardless of whether, you know, that action ends up moving forward. Personally, from my feeling on this entire, you know, this group, I could benefit by having another meeting that actually has the auditor here to ask these other items or to hear for these other items that we were not able to hear today. That's my thing. I understand what you're saying completely, but I'm actually wanting to go back a little further and go, these other items that we didn't get to hear about, I really would like to hear about. But I hear what you're saying on that. So your suggestion, Supervisor Wilson, and then Michael.
Thank you, Chair Bass. You know, from my perspective, these are just tentative weeks. I think, you know, we're not setting anything in stone necessarily. My question for the chair is, were you saying that you wanted to have a meeting to address some of those items before August 9th? Do you feel like that we should do that?
I for my wanting of a better understanding of some of these items that were actually on our agenda today that we didn't even get to talk about.
Okay.
Yeah, for those, and maybe it can be something that is more focused on those items, but I just feel like that's a missing piece that I'd really like to have more information, and I think others might
Sure.
benefit.
So with appreciation of that, and also just an understanding that this is really, we're beta testing this committee a bit here. There's a lot of clunkiness that's occurring, both from the scheduling perspective, but also just how the agenda is laid out. And so we're just, trying things out here. So I think the expectations are reasonable right now. But so would you want to have a meeting? Excuse me. Let's see. We're heading into May, like I don't know, third week of May or something like that, or getting into June. Where do you want to talk
Well,
about getting something like that done?
yeah, I would almost say, since the two items that I feel we're missing today is from the auditor, it's something that, and I do believe we worked with the auditor trying to schedule this, and then something still didn't work out. So I don't know how we could do it, but I just really think it's important to have something where she is there. So not just myself, but, Michael and Corey and Cheryl, who are not part of our, county. Well, actually, Michael is part of our county family, but he's not one of the different kind of different part of our county family. I just, like I said, I guess we'd need to really confirm with the auditor that there are dates that she will hold in stone for us to actually do that, because I was really frustrated that we didn't get to have the conversations today. So
Yeah,
whatever that
well,
may be.
for whatever reasons those are, and I think I'm not in the internal of that, but I do know that I have heard that this is the end of the month. It's very busy time, in the auditor's office for sure, as I would imagine anyone in that line of work, this is it. So nonetheless, I mean, I'm still kind of wondering, do you want us to have an official meeting of this group
Yes.
next month sometime? And I think there will be plenty of time to work that out. I don't. So, okay. So I guess is that some direction you'd like to give?
Well, I'm just saying, with we were talking about the future meetings, and currently they're 4 times a fiscal year, but it seems like we have exceptions for when we need to have something conversation. So yeah, I don't know what date that would be. I would say just connect with the auditor. It would really be nice to have it within the next month, just
Okay.
so we don't it doesn't stagnate. I mean, that's just my thought, though. Michael has his hand up, so he might have a different thought.
Thank you, Chair Bass. I was actually looking to agree that it would be nice to have a special meeting in the next few weeks to focus on items F and G on this agenda with the auditor controller.
Yep. And through the chair, I think that's not unreasonable. I think we'll just give direction to staff to see what they can do to set something up. It shouldn't be impossible. So, and I hope that's a succinct meeting, very in terms of the agenda.
And so, Amy, this is gonna sound weird. I'm so used to doing board meetings, and when something comes up of direction, then we go through the whole motion. And do you need an actual motion for this, for direction? What would you like?
Yes.
All right. So
I'll make a motion that we direct staff to work with the schedule as proposed for weeks in August, November, February, and May, with an additional scheduled meeting that is specific to items. Was it F and G? Did I have that correctly? Sometime in the month of May.
And I'll second that.
okay. And would ask Jim, since he works in the office there, is May is May any worse than any other month? I mean, I know you're always busy, but we have to find a way to make this happen. So if you have any thoughts on what you think might be a possibility when the auditor actually is able to look at this.
I cannot make any promises, but I think in her earlier email, the auditor controller mentioned that end of the month like this meeting was particularly problematic. It's usually when many of our reports are due. at the end of every month. So if you could avoid any more end of the month meetings, that would probably help.
All right, thank you. So we have a motion that's been seconded. Do we have further conversation? Any hands going up? Don't see any right now. I will go and see if there's a member. We have a couple members of the public. Does anyone have any comment they would like to make on this item from the public? All right, seeing none. If there's if everyone's okay, we can just go ahead and vote. Do you need a roll call vote, or do we need it that specific? Amy?
Yes, please.
All right. Life has changed so much. Kathy?
All right. Committee member Corey Weber,
Aye.
committee member Michael Evenson,
Aye.
committee member Supervisor Bass,
Yes.
committee member Supervisor Wilson,
Affirmative.
and committee member Cheryl Dillingham. Cheryl's muted.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 5-0.
So, and then the next item is the timing of the charter responsibilities. Amy?
Supervisor Bass, may I make a recommendation that we include this in the May agenda?
Okay, for timings. Is there any problem with that? Anyone see? Do we need to amend the motion, or can we just expand it? Mike?
Yeah, so I was just kind of wondering, do I need to amend the motion to include item, let's see,
J2.
J2?
And is there anything else we need to to change with that?
Yeah, Amy, do you have any other suggestions or needed items that you want to move before I?
No, I think it would be best because many of these are auditor controller related items that the auditor controller participate in the timing discussion. So that can happen. You can add it. You can make another motion to include J2 in the May meeting.
Well, I'll make that amendment, but I think for just the timing, and I think it's probably okay to just ask the other members if they're amenable to the amendment through consent, and we can just kind of move forward from there. So
Fine with me. John has his hand up. So.
Since we're talking about adding other agenda items, I just wanted to point out that we did not discuss item I, and that is something else that I asked be on the agenda. So if that could be forwarded on to, that would be fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Under item I just have adjourn. So Amy?
yeah, exactly. It's fine.
No, adjourn is item K.
It says, I'm looking here, it does not look like a K on my sheet here, so tell me.
It was probably the earlier version of the agenda.
It's just like, I'm going. Yeah,
I'm having the same experience as Chair Bass.
You know, I mean, I was gonna say, I know I'm tired, but man, I'm not that tired.
The agenda that's posted on the website does have I as discuss government code 26905.
Oh, that's not on this one, okay. I guess this was not the most updated one.
Amy, would you mind sharing the agenda on your screen so we can all see the same thing?
Yeah, that's the most recent one I saw from Kathy, but obviously something's wrong. And sorry, Mike, you got the one I got because I printed it for you.
I appreciate that very much.
I count on me to do that kind of stuff. I apparently did it wrong, but.
Hold on just this 1 second.
Yes,
I
Kathy's
have it
email.
available, CAO Nelson, if that's helpful.
I think I got it.
Okay, cool.
Can you all see that?
Yes, thank you.
So this is the agenda that I've been working from, which is posted online. And so item I is a discussion about government code 26905, and then item K is adjourned.
I see. Okay, great.
Okay, good. So then we'll go on to item I. John, what were you saying about that? Now that I noticed there's an item I that I didn't have.
Well, I just wanted to have it forwarded to the next meeting also for discussion, just because it is a concern of mine. And I think that it should be, the committee should be aware of the action plan to address that particular code. Thank you.
So John, through the chair, if I may, John. So, I mean, we talked about this, I mean, in terms of like, you know, that then you would basically be reporting at that time, kind of whatever update you might have with regards to this, right?
That's correct. And the auditor controller is also involved here, obviously. And there, we do have an action plan that is taking, that is being formulated right now for addressing this. And I wanted to make the committee aware of what the plan is. But it'd be best if the auditor controller were at the meeting also. Thank you.
All right, so through the chair, I believe that the full agenda will then include FG, I, and what was the other thing that now I'm?
J2.
And J2. So if we have consensus from the rest of the committee, I think that's probably good enough for the record.
If it's fine with me, if it's fine with anybody else and with Amy.
Fine with me.
All right.
With me.
All right. Okay. So is that amended? Is that understandable? I mean, Amy, you got that down? I mean, who does keep track of this? Who's taking notes? Oh, Kathy. Okay, you got it. All right. So since the agenda is no longer on my screen, what do we have left? CIO Nelson.
To adjourn.
Okay, I can do that one. Anyone really care if do you want to stay here or can we go now? Because I think we're ready to adjourn. So unless anyone, Mike, did you have something to add?
No, I'm not getting this time back, so.
I'm so used to regular board meetings. Sorry if I'm trying to go, this is just not the same. So, but thank you for all being here. Sorry we did not have a full team, but we'll work on that. And next time we'll have hopefully a lot more to present. So, all right, I guess that means we're adjourned. And thank you for those of you who volunteered. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you. Have a good weekend, everybody.
All right.